14,000 years ago, in the Rhine Valley of what we now call Germany, two people were buried side by side in a carefully prepared grave. Their bodies were surrounded by decorated objects carved from antler and bone, the kind of craftsmanship that signals these people mattered to their community. But the most remarkable thing about this burial was not the humans, it was what lay beside them, a puppy. About 7 months old, small enough to hold in your arms. And this was not some strong, healthy animal that had earned its place through hunting or guarding. This puppy had been sick, very sick. Its teeth bore deep scars from a disease called canine distemper, an illness that would have left it feverish, unable to eat, vomiting, too weak to stand on its own for days at a stretch. Researchers from Leiden University in the Netherlands later examined those damaged teeth and determined the puppy went through at least 2, possibly 3 separate bouts of serious illness, each lasting as long as 6 weeks. And the entire time, somebody in that Ice Age settlement kept it alive. They cleaned up after it, wiped away the vomit and diarrhea, they brought it food and water. They kept it warm when its body could not regulate its own temperature. When the puppy finally died at 28 weeks old, they did not toss it aside. They buried it right next to 2 people they clearly loved. Now think about that for a second. This was the late Paleolithic. The glaciers were retreating, but the world was still harsh and cold. Every calorie mattered. Every hour spent caring for something that could not contribute to the group's survival was an hour not spent hunting or gathering or keeping your own family fed. And yet these people chose to nurse a dying puppy for weeks on end, an animal that would never pull its weight, that could not hunt or guard or herd. Why would anyone do that 14,000 years ago? The answer might be simpler than you expect. They did it for the same reason you would. That grave was first discovered in 1914 by quarry workers in Oberkassel, a suburb of Bonn, Germany. For over a century, researchers studied the human remains, catalogued the grave goods, and mostly overlooked the animal bones scattered among them. The dog's jawbone was originally identified as belonging to a wolf and stored in museum drawers. Its other bones were separated and sent to the university's geological collection. It was not until the late 1970s that the bones were reunited and properly identified as belonging to a domestic dog. And the real breakthrough did not come until 2018, when Luc Janssens, a veterinarian who was also pursuing a doctorate in archaeology at Leiden University, gave the remains a careful clinical examination. Janssens noticed things that archaeologists without veterinary training had missed: enamel hypoplasia on the teeth, severe periodontal disease, abrasion patterns on the jawbone consistent with prolonged illness. His findings, published in the Journal of Archaeological Science, told a story that changed how researchers think about the early human-animal bond. This was not a working relationship. It was something closer to love. But the Oberkassel puppy is not the beginning of this story. Not even close. To find where it really starts, you have to travel much further back in time and go underground into one of the most famous caves on the planet. The Chauvet Cave sits in the Ardèche region of southern France, tucked into limestone cliffs above a winding river gorge. It was discovered in 1994 by a team led by Jean-Marie Chauvet, and what they found inside stunned the archaeological world. More than 400 paintings of animals cover the cave walls. Lions with piercing eyes, horses frozen in mid-gallop, mammoths, rhinoceroses, bears. These images were created roughly 32,000 years ago, making them among the oldest known artworks in human existence. The sophistication of the drawings shocked researchers who assumed that art from that period would look crude and primitive. It does not. These painters understood shading, movement, and perspective in ways that feel almost modern. But the cave held another discovery that might matter even more than the paintings themselves. The original entrance to the cave was sealed by a rockfall roughly 27,000 years ago, which is one of the reasons the paintings survived so well. When Chauvet and his team squeezed through a narrow opening in the cliff face, they entered a world that had been locked in darkness since the Ice Age. Bear skulls were arranged on the cave floor, placed there deliberately by human hands tens of thousands of years ago. Hundreds of animal bones littered the chambers, and, in a deeper passage, preserved in soft clay that had been undisturbed for millennia, researchers found footprints. Human footprints. The prints belonged to a barefoot child, estimated to be about 8 to 10 years old and roughly 4.5 feet tall. Whoever this kid was, they had been walking through the cave carrying a torch, pausing at one point to scrape charcoal from the flame against the cave wall. That smear of charcoal was later dated to approximately 26,000 years ago. The child was walking, not running, just exploring a vast dark cave lit by a single flickering flame, surrounded by painted animals on the walls that would have seemed to move in the shifting light. And walking right alongside the child's tracks, in the same direction, at a steady parallel pace, were the paw prints of a large canid. The prints showed a shortened middle digit on the front paw, a feature characteristic of dogs rather than wolves. Michel Alain Garcia, the prehistorian who studied the tracks, suggested that the child and a large dog explored the cave together. Nobody can prove with absolute certainty that those prints were made at the exact same moment. They could be separated by hours, days, even centuries. But the direction, the spacing, the relaxed gait, all of it points to a child and a dog walking side by side through the dark, 26,000 years before anyone on Earth would write a single word. So at this point, a fair question comes up. When did wolves actually become dogs in the first place? Because if we are talking about ancient pets, we need to understand how that transition worked. The honest answer is that scientists have argued about this for a long time, and the picture keeps shifting as new evidence arrives. A 2015 genetic study estimated that dogs split from wolves somewhere between 27,000 and 40,000 years ago, based on ancient wolf bones found in Siberia. The most widely accepted theory is not that some brave cave dweller grabbed a wolf pup and forced it to behave. That image, the dramatic wolf taming scene you see in movies, is almost certainly fiction. Wolves are strong, fast, and deeply resistant to being controlled by force. The more likely version of how it happened is something researchers call self-domestication. Picture a late Ice Age campsite at night. A fire is burning down to embers. Scattered around the edges are the bones and scraps from the day's hunt, and lurking just outside the firelight, a few wolves are watching. Not the dominant, aggressive wolves. The shyer ones, the ones willing to tolerate the presence of humans long enough to grab a discarded bone. These wolves gradually gained an advantage over their bolder, more dangerous packmates. They got reliable food without the risk of a hunt. Humans, in turn, benefited from having animals nearby that would raise an alarm if something approached the camp in the dark. Over thousands of years, this mutual tolerance deepened. The tamest wolves reproduced more successfully. Their offspring grew tamer still. Generation after generation, something shifted. The animals stopped flinching at human voices. They started approaching closer to the fire. They started following the camps when they moved, and at some point, you could no longer call these animals wolves. They were becoming dogs. A landmark study published in Nature in March of 2026 provided the strongest evidence yet for when this split occurred. Researchers from the Francis Crick Institute, the University of Oxford, and the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology recovered whole genomes from ancient canid bones at several prehistoric sites across Europe and Turkey. The oldest specimens came from Pınarbaşı in Turkey, dated to 15,800 years ago, and Chauvet Cave in England, dated to 14,300 years ago. Their DNA was clearly dog, not wolf. Lucky Skarsbrook, one of the study's lead authors at Oxford, said the results showed that dogs and wolves were already genetically separate by at least 16,000 years ago. And what surprised the team most was how similar these early dogs were to each other, despite living thousands of miles apart. The data suggested dogs spread rapidly alongside expanding human cultures during the final stretch of the last ice age, somewhere between 18,500 and 14,000 years ago. Dogs were the first species ever domesticated by humans, the only animal tamed during the entire hunter-gatherer period before farming existed, before sheep or cattle or anything else. Every other domestication came after humans settled down and started planting crops. Dogs came first, and the genetic evidence now says that happened during the hardest period in recent human history, when ice covered much of the northern hemisphere and survival demanded everything people had. But here is where the story takes a turn that surprised even the archaeologists who study this for a living. Dogs were not the only animals ancient people formed deep bonds with. In northern Israel, near the shore of what was once Lake Hula, lies a site called Ain Malaha, also known as Ainan. It was home to the Natufian people, a culture that lived in the region roughly 12,000 to 15,000 years ago. The Natufians were among the first humans anywhere on Earth to settle in permanent villages, making the slow transition from fully nomadic life to something more rooted. They hunted gazelles, fished in the lake, gathered wild cereals, and may have been among the earliest people to experiment with agriculture. They also buried their dead right next to their houses, in graves that were often elaborate and carefully arranged. The Natufians were not primitive in any meaningful sense of the word. They decorated their pottery with intricate designs. They carved animal figurines from stone. They made jewelry from shells and bone. Their villages had architecture, social structure, and burial customs that suggest a rich and complex culture. They were people with inner lives, with preferences and attachments and grief. In one of those graves, archaeologists uncovered something that became an icon of early human-animal relationships. A woman lying on her right side, her left hand resting gently on the ribcage of a 3 to 5 month old puppy. Not thrown in as a sacrifice, not placed there as an offering to some god. Her hand was on the animal, the way you might rest your hand on a sleeping dog curled up next to you on the couch. Simon Davis and Francois Valla published this finding in the journal Nature in 1978, and it remains one of the most cited discoveries in the study of animal domestication. But the Natufians were not only burying dogs. Other graves from the same period and region have turned up fox mandibles and fox teeth, arranged as if they held special meaning. And at an even older site in northern Jordan called Uyun al-Hammam, dating to roughly 16,500 years ago, researchers found a burial that pushed the timeline back further still. A human had been interred alongside a partly articulated fox skeleton. The fox was not dinner scraps. It had been fully buried, sprinkled with red ochre, the same pigment used to mark the human dead. The treatment was identical. Archaeologist Ted Banning from the University of Toronto noted the striking similarities between this fox burial and the way dogs were treated in later Natufian graves. "It is tempting," he said, "to think they considered the fox equivalent to a dog in some way, because we tend to think of dogs as eventually becoming our best friends and pets. Were ancient humans trying to tame foxes before dogs became the standard companion? The evidence cannot say for certain, but it suggests that the urge to bond with another species runs deeper than any single act of domestication. The desire came first, the practicalities came after. And that brings us to cats. Ask 10 people on the street when cats became pets, and 9 of them would probably say ancient Egypt. Sacred temples, mummified cats wrapped in linen, Bastet, the cat-headed goddess. It is one of the most familiar stories in ancient history, and it is wrong by about 4,000 years. On the island of Cyprus, at a Neolithic settlement called Chiluracambos near modern Limassol, French archaeologist Jean-Denis Vigne and his colleagues made a discovery in 2001 that rewrote the timeline of cat domestication entirely. They found a burial dating to approximately 7500 BC. A human, roughly 30 years old, had been interred with polished stone tools, jewelry, and a pit containing 24 complete seashells. And less than half a meter away, at the same depth, in the same undisturbed sediment, lay the complete skeleton of an 8-month-old African wildcat. The cat's bones were fully articulated, which in archaeological terms means they had not been scattered by scavengers or tossed in as garbage. This animal had been deliberately placed there, positioned with care. When Vigne published the findings in the journal Science in 2004, the implications landed hard. Cats are not native to Cyprus. there has never been a wild cat population on the island. Every cat that has ever existed there was brought by human hands across the open Mediterranean Sea. So someone, 9,500 years ago, loaded a young African wildcat onto a boat and carried it to an island they were colonizing. This was not an accident. You do not accidentally transport a cat across miles of open water, and you do not bury an accidental stowaway next to a person surrounded by offerings and fine tools. The Neolithic farmers who settled Cyprus brought a whole menagerie with them. Evidence from the island shows they transported dogs, cattle, goats, sheep, foxes, pigs, and deer. One archaeologist described them as arriving with a veritable Noah's Ark. But the cat stands out from every other animal on that list. Dogs can guard, cattle provide meat and milk. Goats are walking food supplies. There is no obvious practical reason to bring an African wildcat to a new island when you already have dogs for guarding and hunting. Wildcats are not helpful in any measurable way. They are stubborn, semi-solitary, and notoriously difficult to control. The simplest explanation, and the one that most researchers now lean toward, is companionship. Someone wanted their cat with them badly enough to haul it across the open sea. If Cyprus rewrites the beginning of the cat story, then Berenice, Egypt, rewrites how we think about its scale. Berenice was a bustling port city on the Red Sea coast during the Roman period, a hub of trade connecting Egypt to India and the Eastern Mediterranean. In 2011, archaeozoologist Marta Osypinska from the Polish Academy of Sciences was excavating outside the ancient city walls, in an area labeled simply as a Roman-era trash dump. What she found beneath the surface was not trash at all. Over nearly a decade of meticulous work, Osypinska and her team uncovered a dedicated animal cemetery containing the remains of 585 creatures. 536 of them were cats. 32 were dogs. The rest included monkeys, a couple of macaques, a Barbary falcon, and even a fox. Each animal had been buried individually. Several of the cats were still wearing bronze collars or delicate necklaces threaded with shell, glass, and stone beads. Some were wrapped in textile blankets. Others were covered with overturned pottery bowls that served as tiny coffin lids. The condition of the bones told an even deeper story. Many of the dogs were old, with worn or missing teeth, severe joint problems, and limited ability to walk. One cat had a healed leg fracture that would have made it completely unable to hunt or fend for itself. These animals survived only because someone fed them. Osypinska pointed out that some of the nearly toothless animals would have required special soft food to eat anything at all. The abdominal cavities of several animals still contained fish bones and scales, meaning their owners in this remote port town, where nearly every resource had to be imported at real cost, were sharing meals with their animals. No signs of deliberate killing, no religious artifacts, no mummification. This is the distinction that matters most. At places like the Saqqara catacombs near Cairo, millions of cats and dogs were sacrificed and mummified as offerings to the gods, particularly to the jackal-headed deity Anubis. Those animals were bred specifically to be killed and wrapped in linen. That is religion, not love. Berenice was something else entirely. It was not a temple. It was a place where people laid their pets to rest because they missed them. When Marta Osypinska first proposed researching the site, some experienced colleagues tried to discourage her. They said pets were not important to the lives of ancient people, that animals were kept for work, food, or ritual, nothing more. She spent a decade proving them wrong. Michael McKinnon, a zoo archaeologist at the University of Winnipeg, reviewed the findings and said he had never encountered a cemetery like it. The idea of pets as family is hard to prove in the ancient world, he said, but at Berenice, that is exactly what they were, and the pattern does not stop in Egypt. In ancient Rome, pets were woven into daily life across every social class. Dogs were the favorite by far, kept in homes as companions and guards. But wealthy Roman households also imported green Indian parrots and African nightingales that could mimic human words. Children kept ducks, quail, and even geese as playmates. House snakes were appreciated for catching rats. Monkeys imported from North Africa served as expensive novelties in elite homes. The Roman poet Martial wrote with genuine affection about a little dog named Isa, who belonged to his friend Publius. And in the British Museum today, a carved marble slab preserves an epitaph for a Roman dog named Margarita, meaning pearl. The inscription is written in the voice of the dog herself. She remembers running through woods, hunting across rough hills, and sleeping in the laps of her master and mistress. Someone, nearly 2,000 years ago, was so devastated by the loss of their dog that they hired a stonemason to carve her biography into marble so it would last forever, and it did. That stone outlasted the Roman Empire itself. The grief of one pet owner, preserved for 2 millennia, sitting in a glass case in London, where you can read it today. Across the Atlantic Ocean, in the ancient American Southwest and Mesoamerica, indigenous peoples traded scarlet macaws from tropical forests hundreds of miles to the south. These brilliant red and blue birds represented sun gods in Maya and Aztec religious traditions. Their feathers were traded alongside copper bells, cacao, and seashells through vast exchange networks stretching from central Mexico to what is now New Mexico. At Chaco Canyon, macaw remains have been found at archaeological sites dating back over 1,000 years. Some communities appear to have raised the birds from hatchlings, which is not a casual undertaking. You have to hand feed a baby macaw several times a day. You have to keep it warm. You have to house it, socialize it, endure the noise it makes. Nobody raises a parrot from a chick because they have to. They do it because they want to. The same impulse showing up on the other side of the world in a completely different culture with a completely different animal. That is not coincidence. That is human nature. So what does all of this add up to? It adds up to a conclusion that researchers have been slow to fully embrace, partly because the evidence was scattered across continents and millennia, and partly because it challenged a deeply held assumption. The assumption was that ancient humans were purely practical about animals. Dogs existed for hunting, cats existed for pest control, horses existed for riding and hauling. Affection, if it existed, was a side effect, not the motivation. Animals earned their keep, or they were not kept at all. The evidence makes that story very hard to maintain. There are still skeptics. Some researchers argue that we cannot truly know what ancient people felt, that we are projecting modern emotions onto bones and burial positions. And they have a point. You cannot fossilize a feeling. But when you see a pattern repeated across 14,000 years, across every inhabited continent, across cultures that had no contact with each other whatsoever, at some point, the simplest explanation becomes the most credible one. And the simplest explanation is that these people cared about their animals. A sick puppy nursed through weeks of fever in Ice Age Germany. A child walking with a dog through a painted cave 26,000 years ago in France. A woman buried with her hand resting on a puppy's chest in a Natufian village near Galilee. A fox given a human funeral in Jordan over 16,000 years ago. A wildcat carried by boat to the island of Cyprus 9,500 years ago by Neolithic farmers who could have brought anything but chose to bring a cat. Nearly 600 pets wearing collars and necklaces, wrapped in blankets, laid to rest with the remains of shared fish dinners in a remote Egyptian seaport. These are not the acts of people who viewed animals as tools with legs. These are the acts of people who loved their animals the same way you love yours. The urge to form a bond with another creature, to care for something that cannot ask for help, to grieve when it dies. This is not a recent invention. It did not appear when humans got comfortable enough to have spare time and disposable income. It has been with us for at least as long as we have been burying our dead with any kind of care at all. The 2026 genetic study that mapped early dog populations across Europe revealed that these animals spread rapidly alongside expanding human groups during the final stretch of the Ice Age. The researchers believe this happened not simply because dogs were the most useful species available, but because the connection between humans and dogs was unlike anything else in the natural world. It was emotional from the start. Lockie Scarsbrook said it clearly. This secures their title as our best friend. Not a recent title, the oldest one we have. The next time you watch your dog chase a ball across a park, or your cat settle into a warm patch of sunlight on your kitchen floor, know that you are part of something ancient. Something older than farming, older than cities, older than written language itself. Your ancestors, tens of thousands of years ago, looked at an animal and felt the exact same thing you feel right now. If this video changed the way you think about ancient humans and the animals they loved, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us about your own pet. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this story.